This man was once a procurer, a numbers runner, a thief, and a narcotics pusher. His name was Malcolm Little, his nickname, Big Red. He was to become the most articulate voice of the black Muslims, and later their severest critic. Malcolm Little became a black Muslim while serving a 6-year prison term. When he was paroled in 1952, he took the name Malcolm X. During the next 11 years, he rose in the hierarchy of Elijah Muhammad's movement. He was pointed to as a model of the Muslim doctrine of self-help, a man who started as an uneducated ex-convict and became a gifted public speaker, filling engagements at Harvard, Yale, and Columbia universities. Many saw him as the logical successor to Elijah Muhammad himself, and perhaps he saw himself in that role. In any case, he was the most forceful exponent of Muhammad's views.
Major aims of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is to clean our people up and put us back in a godly place on this earth, a place where we can practice righteousness and godliness and truth, brotherhood, peace, and be a respectable people. This is all. And he does it by cleaning us up, by waking us up, cleaning us up, and standing us up. And this solves not only our problem, but it solves the white man's problem.
But beyond the orthodoxy of black Muslim teachings, Malcolm X found his greatest talent as an orator in stirring the deepest feelings of frustration and disillusionment common to virtually all American Negroes. They said of him, he tells it like it is.
One white man named Lincoln supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Another white man named Lincoln, again the same white man, issued the Emancipation Proclamation to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Some more white liberals came along with the 13th, 14th, and 5th Amendments, which were supposed to solve the race problem. The problem is still here. 9 years ago, 9 more white liberals, so-called, came up with what they call a Supreme Court desegregation decision, and the problem is still here. And then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law when he sent for the troops when the Negroes erupted than he had at the time when whites were erupting. So we are within our rights and with justice, with justification, when we express doubt concerning the ability of the white man to solve our problem, and also when we express doubt concerning his integrity, concerning his sincerity. Because you will have to confess that the problem has been around here for a long time, and whites have been saying the same thing about it for the past 100 years, and it's no nearer a solution today than it was 100 years ago.
When President Kennedy was assassinated, Malcolm publicly called the murder a case of the chickens coming home to roost, and he added, being an old farm boy myself, chickens coming home to roost never did make me sad. They've always made me glad. That statement was outrageous enough for Elijah Muhammad to suspend Malcolm from public speaking engagements.
He had followed me for a few years, and all that he knew and how now to become an evil person to me, he had learned in these few years. Therefore, he felt that he was now a big man before the public, and this seemed to have been his desire. He wanted to be seen and heard. He wanted to exalt himself above his teacher.
Malcolm soon left the movement entirely. He talked of violence, bloodletting, and arming Negroes with rifles and shotguns. He publicly accused Elijah Muhammad of fathering 8 illegitimate babies and said the sect was a racket. The Muslims fought back, labeling Malcolm a hypocrite worthy of death. His brother, staying with the Muslim movement, called Malcolm mentally sick. Elijah Muhammad's side of the battle was carried on through his newspaper and by individual Muslim ministers like Bernard Kouchner, San Francisco spokesman for the group.
And means of getting greater ammunition. And that's the end of it. So Malcolm's attempt is only a hypocritical move, a move designed to attract attention. But anyone who cares to examine Malcolm will agree with us. He's a cheap hypocrite of the worst sort.
But Malcolm began gathering followers, including one of Elijah Muhammad's sons and a grandson. Malcolm continued talking about black nationalism, But slowly his views seemed to change. He spoke less of violence and bloodbath and more of cooperation, integration, and brotherhood. And he showed interest in joining the mainstream of the civil rights movement with people like Dr. Martin Luther King. He said he no longer believed whites were devils, that among them were some sincere men of goodwill. Elijah Muhammad, meanwhile, reported that his son had returned to the Muslims, and he still hoped his grandson would reject Malcolm. He also professed belief that Malcolm himself would one day return.
My work is divine work. Allah has chosen me for the work, and therefore the God just don't change him like that and put down one and take up another one. If one baby don't act right, he will spank him anyway and make him act right, but he don't mean to kill the baby and put another baby in his place. So Malcolm didn't have this kind of knowledge that he would not have acted as he has acted. I think the justice is after Malcolm, and that pretty soon he will be on his knees trying to crawl back to just that what he left from.
On February 14th, the New York house in which Malcolm lived with his wife and children was bombed and burned. Malcolm said the bombing was a Muslim attempt on his life. They said he did it himself to attract attention. Malcolm had frequently said that he was marked for death at the hands of the black Muslims. On February 21st, while addressing a meeting of his followers, Malcolm X was shot down by Negro gunmen. Police identified two of them as black Muslims. At Malcolm's funeral, he was eulogized as a great spokesman for his race. It seems probable, had he lived, that Malcolm X would have emerged as a major force in the Negro battle for civil rights. San Francisco black Muslim minister Bernard Kouchner summed up his feelings about Malcolm's murder.
No love lost. I have no regrets, nor any joy. There's neither one. I expected something like this to happen. Of course, I didn't expect it to happen, say, at this time and so violently. But he often told me, this goes back ever since I've known him, that he expected to die violently. He was that kind of person. We have been accused of far more serious things than just this. We've even been accused of trying to destroy this government, both of which are false. There's so many false things said about Messenger Muhammad and his followers that I could write a book on it.
The story of the black Muslims continues in a moment. Elijah Muhammad and his followers claim they are innocent in the murder of their most famous defector, Malcolm X. On the subject of weapons and violence, the black Muslim leader has had this to say.
The Muslim is not according to his own scripture, never to resort to violence. And he's taught to only, we say, use self-defense if attacked, but never to be the attacker. But in fact, about it is against the divine law, and God himself is not on the side of the Muslim if he resort to such things as violence. And he could easily be classified as non-Muslim.
But violence has continued as part of the black Muslim story. 2 days after Malcolm's death, an explosion and fire gutted the Muslim mosque in Harlem in what appeared to be the first act of retribution for the murder. Now Elijah Muhammad himself is said to be a marked man. Followers of Malcolm X have sworn vengeance. During the Nation of Islam's convention in February, it was reported that Avengers were on their way to Chicago. A few days later, shots were fired at Muhammad's Phoenix home. But the leader of the black Muslims survives and continues the preachment which to his followers is the divine way and therefore above question. A preachment which to the Negro non-believer may be bizarre and even grotesque in its theology, but which in its social aspects is very real when every day one experiences frustration, rebuff, insult, and disinheritance. If Elijah Muhammad is the messenger of Allah to the black Muslim, he's also a worldly messenger to the rest of us. And that message might be found in the words spoken by a Negro nationalist some 40 years ago. It was Marcus Garvey who said, "The bones of injustice have a peculiar way of rising from the tombs to plague and mock the iniquitous." Assignment 4 is presented each week in the community interest by the News and Documentary Department of KRON-TV.